This is chapter 5.4, standard form. What you're going to learn is that the standard form of a line is here ax plus by equals c. There are some key differences in standard form and slope-intercept form, which is what we've been working with, which is the y equals mx plus b. First off, in standard form, x and y, if you haven't noticed, are on the same side, whereas in slope-intercept form, it's y equals. So whenever you see y equals, you're going to have to use what we learned for those. Now, whenever we see one where x and y are on the same side, we have to use what we're going to learn about this week. Second of all, the letters A, B, and C mean nothing at all. In this one, that represented slope, that represented where it crosses the y-axis. A, B, and C mean nothing, so don't look to those numbers for any reason. Third, we do have to use some basic algebra to graph a line. If you remember about slope-intercept form, this told us to go up or down and put a dot, and then that gave us our slope. It does not work here. We actually have to do a little bit of work to find it. It's not a lot of work, but it starts with what we're doing today, which is the first step. The first step of working with standard form is finding the x and y intercept. I'm going to explain the full process at some point if I haven't already. I'm actually probably going to explain a little bit during this video, but remember, it's meant to be short so that we can just kind of get to the point, get to the practice, and then perfect the skill as we go on. So let's just look at some examples real fast, and again, make sure you write these because this is going to help you with doing the computer work. X and y intercept. The thing about the x-intercept is that it's the number, and again we'll talk about it, it's the number that results when you put 0 in for y. But what you have to understand is that whenever I have, let's say, 3x plus 2y equals 11, if I put a 0 in for y, that's what I end up with first. 2 times 0, of course, equals 0. And then we really don't write a 0, so you just end up with that. So really what happens is putting 0 in for y just eliminates y. Just like the y-intercept is putting in 0 for x. So if you were to do that for x of 3 times 0 plus 2y equals 11, that would be 0 plus 2y equals 11. Of course the 0 goes away, which means again putting 0 in for something is pretty much like making it disappear. So what I'm going to teach you on this is to say that if you want the x-intercept, you just focus only on x and ignore y. If you want the y-intercept, you focus only on y and ignore x. So that's what we're going to do here. Make sure you write all these words because you need it for whenever you're getting to your computer. First thing we're going to do is find the x-intercept. And again, if we find the x-intercept, that means we read this and we ignore everything that has a y. So on this side, we write the 3x, we ignore the 8y, and we write the 24. Easy enough. After that, to solve, we would divide by 3, and x would equal 8. That is your x-intercept. Alright, so again, your x-intercept is x equals 8. If you want your y-intercept, y-intercept means I care more about y, which means I don't care about x, which means I take this x and I ignore it. So I ignore the 3x and I bring down my 8y and my 24. After that, of course, divide by 8, getting y equals 3. That's it. That's your x-intercept, that's your y-intercept. I did say you'd have to use basic algebra. It's not a high level of algebra to work with standard form, but you do have to at least know about this part and make sure you don't make any mistakes. And what I mean about that is whenever you get to this part here on B, this is where the mistakes happen. Not so much on the x-intercept, but on the y-intercept. Again, the x-intercept here, if I care about x, that means I ignore everything that has a y on it, which means I ignore that part. What I'm left with is 2x equals 12. The first step on your computer part is going to say what equation would you use. That's what you'll type in, 2x equals 12. And then your second line is going to say what is the x-intercept, and of course you'll just put x equals 6. Now of course if you don't know where I got the x equals 6 from, it's from dividing by 2. I don't need you to show me the divide by 2 on the computer because I think you're smart enough to recognize that you just divide by 2 to get that answer. So the two things you're going to type in on this question are 2x equals 12 and x equals 6 because those would be the two boxes of information that you're looking for. If you want your y-intercept, now this is where you have to be careful because when I ignore my 2x, the 3 attached to this y is negative and you cannot lose that. Again, it's negative 3y equals 12, which means you divide by negative 3 and you end up with y equals negative 4, which is key because if you don't see that as a negative, you'll go the wrong direction. Again, the two things you would type in on that answer if you're on a computer is negative 3x equals 12, negative 3y equals 12, and y equals negative 4. So when you get to your computer, this is the only thing you have to type in, It's just making sure you get the practice on doing that process so you can be faster and better at it whenever it really counts. Just getting to some other types of problems. Again, if you want your x-intercept on this, ignore y, which means x comes down, 9 comes down. That's it. There's no solving to do on that one. Your y-intercept, on the other hand, you ignore your x, you bring down your negative 3y and 9. You divide by negative 3, and y is negative 3. That's your x-intercept and your y-intercept. So again, it's not too bad. You just got to make sure you practice like you're supposed to. Here, x-intercept is going to be based off of the equation 4x equals 8. Because remember, we ignore the y. That means we then divide by 4, getting x equals 2. Your y-intercept means ignore your x, but don't forget that that y is negative, so we get negative y equals 8, and don't forget in algebra we can't stop with a negative y, so we have to flip our y and flip our 8, getting those two as our intercepts for that graph. Alright. And then E, as we wrap this up, is just to make sure you understand that not all the numbers are perfect. When we go to find our x-intercept, we end up with 4x equals 9. When you go to divide 9 by 4, of course, it doesn't work. And so you could just leave it as 9 over 4 as it turned up in your calculator, but we'll learn what to do with this later when we actually get to graphing. But again, that's probably sometime later this week. Your y-intercept here, you ignore your x, you end up with 3y equals 9. You divide by 3, you get y equals 3. Now there shouldn't be any fractions or decimals on your homework today because I made sure all your numbers were perfect. But this example was just to make sure you understood that, again, fractions do exist, they can still pop up. So go ahead and go to your Math Excel, wrap up the questions that are on there. If you finish, again, put your computer up, grab the second worksheet, and then we'll talk about all that stuff when class is over, or when we get close to the end of the hour. But other than that, like I said, make sure you get as much as you can out of this, especially the practice of writing those parts, because that's really what's going to make the difference in whether or not you know how to graph later on. So, good luck.